One of the things with aviation, of course, is that things are constantly changing. I mean, for instance, something like the cars, which are being rewritten and the rules changed according to how aviation develops and progresses. But also, we have things changing on maybe even a day-to-day, hour-by-hour, and week-to-week basis. For example, let's say that maybe you're flying to an airport, and for whatever reason, maybe they have closed a runway. Perhaps they have to repaint that runway. Well, how are you going to know as a pilot? That would be through this system here, the NOTAMS system, short for Notice to Airmen. Now, when it comes to Notice to Airmen, it's a notification that contains information concerning the establishment, condition, or change to any one of the following items. It can be an aeronautical facility, it can be a service, it can be a procedure, or it can be a hazard. So when we look through this, an aeronautical facility would of course be something like, say, an airport, and maybe that runway closure. Perhaps it could be something like, say, an instrument landing system that has maybe gone haywire. For services, those might include things like, say, fuel and the availability of fuel. For procedures, that of course would be things like maybe on an instrument approach where there was a typo on a height. Perhaps maybe it could be something in terms of, say, on a map where maybe they've mislabeled a VFR call-up point or something like that. And then of course there's hazards of any other sort. With NOTAMs, they're going to be issued when or where timely knowledge is essential to personnel who are concerned with flight operations. So of course you, as a pilot, prior to going flying, one of the key things you're going to do, of course, is check the NOTAMs. And I've got lots of stories of students who didn't check NOTAMs and found out when they got to their destination that, well, everything wasn't working as they had hoped. I'll come back and maybe tell a story or two throughout this presentation. Now, when it comes to NOTAMs, of course, they're going to try to publish them as early and as soon as possible. Going back to this runway example, where an airport determines that they need to close the runway because they need to repaint all of those numbers and stripes so that we can see them, the airport operator should plan ahead and actually put that NOTAM in ahead of time. So a NOTAM will be published with sufficient notice time for the affected parties to take any required action. The lead time, of course, is at the discretion of the originator, so that airport operator, but it shouldn't exceed 14 days, and it should be no less than 6 hours of lead time. Whenever possible, at least 24 hours of advance notice is desirable to permit timely completion of the notification process and to facilitate any airspace planning that may need to be done. Now, of course, in the real world, things don't always go as planned. I mean, we also have maybe radio aids that decide to shut down at random. So within the NOTAM system, of course, there is exceptions allowed for this lead time. Exceptions can be the cases of an unplanned unserviceability, maybe a volcano goes up, the release of radioactive material or other toxic chemicals, or any other sorts of events that cannot be foreseen. A NOTAM, of course, in these cases could be put out quite quickly and with very short notice. Typically, though, when it comes to other items, you're going to have some lead time. So let's say that we need to put a NOTAM out. Well, in today's digital age, actually this here has changed a little bit. This here says that NOTAMs are distributed by teletype. Imagine that, teletype. Got a little bit of a story here. There we go, teleprinter, one in use in England during World War II here. So you can see the operator, clickety-clackety, clickety-clackety, and then of course, that good old keyboard up here, and then you'd have all of the printer stuff coming out. Now, of course, long ago, when all of this technology was in its infancy and we had to get information out to pilots, we would send out NOTAMs on these teletype machines. Now, because, of course, there was limited data and limited data speeds and then limited amounts of paper, maybe, there was a shorthand form that was developed. And that's why we have NOTAMs published as they are today. Now, admittedly, in today's digital age, maybe we don't really need to have all of this shorthand, but we still do. And your job, and what we're going to do throughout this presentation, of course, is we're going to give you the ability to read NOTAMs. So, at one time, through telecommunication network, AFTN, nowadays, of course, it's typically over the internet and through other digital means. Now, NOTAMs, as I've been talking, are typically going to be sent out 14 days to 6 hours in advance. Most NOTAMs have a very short shelf life as well. So in this paragraph here, we talk a little bit about how information has changed on, say, an aeronautical chart or some sort of an aeronautical information publication. With a NOTAM, the average lifespan is going to be 56 days. Now, I should be careful with that. I should say typically the maximum lifespan is going to be 56 days. Not always. But some of you may recognize that 56-day as being the same cycle in which new CFSs are printed out. So when you go flying, check the NOTAMs, but it's also important that you check in the CFS. There is a section known as the flight planning section. So what will happen is if a NOTAM is scheduled to last about 56 days, the new CFS comes out, and maybe it's, say, something like a new tower that has been built, or maybe a change to airspace or something like that. Well, that NOTAM will then get plugged into the flight planning section in the CFS. And the CFS will now tell you about that tower or change to airspace. So check your NOTAMs, but also take a look in your CFS as well. Okay, anyways, let's keep going here with our NOTAMs, and we just quickly skipped that right there, the teletype page. So let's now talk a little bit about when are we supposed to issue NOTAMs. Well, a NOTAM shall be originated and issued promptly whenever the information to be distributed is of a temporary nature and of a short duration, or when operationally significant, permanent, or temporary changes of a long duration are going to be made. Now, items that should be NOTAMed include, but are not totally limited to, the following items. We have, first off, the establishment or withdrawal of electronic and other aids to air navigation and aerodromes. Okay, so NDBs, VORs that are being decommissioned or that maybe don't work. Any changes in frequency, identification, orientation, and or location of electronic aids to navigation, and any interruptions in service or unreliability, and the return to normal operation of en route and terminal aids to navigation. Those should be NOTAMed. You'll notice that we have quite a few more items here. The establishment or withdrawal of, or significant changes to, designated airspace or air traffic procedures and services. The presence or removal of hazards that could endanger air navigation or aircraft operations. So sometimes you'll see in the NOTAMs, maybe construction is happening at an airport and they need a crane to start to build something. Well, that will be NOTAMed. Military exercises or maneuvers and airspace reservations, the establishment or discontinuance of or a change in the status of advisory or restricted areas, so airspace changes. Communication failures where no satisfactory alternative frequency is available. Inaccuracies or omissions in publications that might endanger aircraft operations. So earlier I mentioned changes in altitudes on a published procedure plate. Some other items would include significant changes in operations of runways and the serviceabilities of associated approach or runway lighting systems that could prohibit or limit aircraft operations. I got a story about this one actually here, because this is telling us that, well, maybe the runway lights don't work, so that should be NOTAMed. And not too long ago, there was a student that decided to fly to an aerodrome in a 172, and thankfully they had lots and lots of fuel. It was a night flight. They took off, and they flew to what they thought was going to be their destination aerodrome. Well, when they got to their destination aerodrome, they started to press their little, push to talk to get the RCAL to work, and the RCAL didn't turn on. So, of course, the student kind of like, all right, something's not right. So grabbed that little push to talk and pushed it a little bit more vigorously. Well, still nothing happened. Okay, now they're really pushing that push to talk, right? Still no response. So fortunately, the student had lots of fuel, and they just overflew the airport, did not attempt to land, and they came back home. Well, when they got back home, they're scratching their head, and they're like, why didn't the airport lights go on? Then it was at that point that they went a little bit more carefully through their NOTAMs. And guess what they found? Yes, they found a NOTAM saying that the RCAL was not operational for the next week as the airport was doing maintenance on it. So, that's one example of why you should check your NOTAMs prior to going flying. I mean, imagine if that poor student did not have enough fuel to come back home. Now they're in definitely some trouble, right? So read those NOTAMs. Other items that could require us to publish a NOTAM would include the failure of measuring and or indicating systems that are needed to supply information on the altimeter setting, the surface winds, the RVR, cloud heights, for any pilot that is about to land or take off. And then for this statement here, if you really want to, you can consult Annex 15 to the Convention on the International Civil Aviation, and it gives a great big list of items that should be NOTAMed as well. Okay, it's pretty dry reading, so, maybe you don't want to do it unless if you absolutely have to maybe get something to find you help go to sleep, maybe. But you're not going to find all of the items in here on the exam. A few of the items that we've been mentioning earlier, maybe those might pop up, but these items here, don't worry too much about it. Okay, so now we're going to move into the portion where let's decode a NOTAM. All right, this is what a typical NOTAM will look like. As we look at this NOTAM, what I first want to point out is right here, you can see we have Q with a parenthesis, we have A with a parenthesis, we have B with a parenthesis, and then C with a parenthesis, D and E, F and G. Sometimes these are called lines. So any of the information that follows any of these letters with parentheses after it, sometimes these are called lines. This here would be called the Q line, and you can see that we've highlighted it in a red box. Of course, the Q line, as we can see, is subdivided into other sections as well. Now, I actually tend to use this term, however. Frequently, this Q could also be called the Q item, as opposed to the Q line. Now, when you go reading through your study materials, you will sometimes see the Q line used. Maybe some sources will say the Q item. It doesn't really matter. It's the same thing. Myself, as I said, I tend to prefer to call them items. And that's because A, well, you can see that it's not a full line. We suddenly have A, B, and C. So we could say we have the A, B, and C lines, but it seems to make just a little bit more sense to me that I call it the A, B, and C items. All right, so in your study materials, if you hear or see lines or items being used interchangeably, don't worry about it. I might accidentally do the same in the next few slides as well, but typically I like to use the term items. Notice that the first few boxes up here don't actually have an item or a line identifier. That's because this here, being the first part of the NOTAM, are actually referred to as the continuity items. All right, so let's start out with that top section of a NOTAM and the continuity items, the continuity number. When it comes to this format is in S***N/Y. Pretty simple to read this, actually. The first letter here is what we call the series letter. And in Canada, we have 18 series letters. From there, we then have a 4-digit number, the N, that is the actual NOTAM number. Okay, so this allows us, of course, the ability to give lots of numbers, and then once we run out of numbers, to give it a new series letter. The final 2 digits after the slash are simply the 2 digits for the calendar year. So this particular NOTAM, as we can see, it's series N, NOTAM number 241, and it is from the year of 2019. Now, the second part of the continuity line is the NOTAM type box. So right here. This particular one, we can see it says NOTAM N. So right away, I know that this is a new NOTAM. Right here, it tells us, as we've just said, when we look at that last letter, we can now tell what type the NOTAM is. So new, then I could also have an R, which would be a replacing NOTAM, or I could have a C, which is a canceling NOTAM. Now, in the last slide, well, and this one here too, we can see that this is a brand new NOTAM. So now we're starting to get into the line or item section. The first line or item is typically the most complicated one. This is the Q line, the qualifier line. It contains all sorts of coded information, coordinates, the radius of the area of influence, and all of this information is simply going to help filter the NOTAM. It's going to help the computer systems determine where they should put these NOTAMs and as well when they should send the NOTAMs out. For instance, somebody goes to the CFPS website that gives us our NOTAMs, and we'll take a look at that in just a few moments, and they key in an aerodrome. Well, this information will tell the computer that it needs to pull up that NOTAM for the pilot that has requested it. Does more than that, though, this Q line. It, of course, gives us all sorts of things like geographical coordinates here. And then, as mentioned, it also tells us things like the heights of the NOTAM. It tells us about the type of, say, operations that are affected by the NOTAM. But let's get into that by moving on to the next few slides. The Q line is divided into 8 fields, each separated by a stroke. So there's those strokes right there. And let's now take a look at each of these 8 fields individually. Here's the first little bit of the Q line. This is the section that identifies the flight information region. The flight information region, of course, is the ICAO location indicator of the flight information region within which the subject of the information is located geographically. So in this case here, we can see down here CZUL, which I believe is for the Montreal flight information region. If the subject of the information is located geographically within more than one flight information region, What then happens is we have the ICAO nationality letters followed by double X. So an example of that would be CZXX. That means that a NOTAM would affect more than one flight information region. So for you as a pilot, when you go to the CFPS website, you key in your aerodromes that you're going to. What will then happen is if, say, it's an aerodrome, or I should say a NOTAM that's for the entire nation, well, the double X, that would get pulled up by any flight plan throughout any location in Canada. If you're flying in the Montreal area, of course, this one would pop up if it recognizes the aerodrome as being within the flight information region of Montreal. Now, next up, we have what are known as the International NOTAM Q codes. This is a group of letters, 5 in total, that tells us about what this specific NOTAM is for. Now, when it comes to this, if you really want, you can actually go to the little magic book that helps decode it, but you're not really going to need to know this for the exam. The first letter is always the letter Q to indicate a code that is used for the abbreviation of these NOTAMs. The second and third letters identify the subject being reported. So you could use the booklet for the decoding to figure out by using the second and third letter decode tables. The fourth and fifth letters identify the status of the operation of the subject being reported. And in this case, we would use the fourth and fifth letter decode tables. So when it comes to this section here, what I'm really saying in a long way here is that you don't really need to worry about it for the exam in terms of decoding it. You do need to know what it's for, but you don't need to decode this part. Okay. Next section, though, of the Q line, we definitely need to know and understand how to decode it. This shows the type of traffic that is associated with these NOTAMs. So, if I happen to see here, this one is IV. Well, that's not the solution that you stick in your veins, the intravenous solution. What IV means is that it's a NOTAM for both IFR and VFR traffic. If I saw the letter I here, that would tell me that this particular NOTAM is solely for IFR traffic. If I happen to see a V there, well, now what happens, of course, is that's for VFR traffic. The most common designator that we will see is the IV here. All right, and that's because, well, maybe if you don't pay attention to the NOTAM, then you might end up in the hospital, and now you're going to need the IV solution. Anyways, okay. All right, let's move on to the next section. For the next section, we have what is known as the NOTAM purpose. Now, these you do need to know as well. There's a number of different possible values, and the most common combinations are going to be NBO, BO, B, M, and K. So, what do each of these mean? First off, the letter N says that this particular NOTAM is for the immediate attention of air operators due to its importance. The letter B is indicating to us that this particular NOTAM needs to be included in the pilot's pre-flight briefings. So, this is in the pre-flight information bulletins. O says that this NOTAM is related to flight operations. And then when we get to an M, this is a miscellaneous NOTAM that is not subject to a briefing. However, it is available upon request. So notice the subtle difference here between this one and this one. This one must be the part of a pre-flight briefing. Finally, this one is the rarest of all. K is a checklist. Now, the next section might seem kind of similar, but it is a little bit different. It's what's known as the NOTAM's scope. When it comes to the scope, it's sort of like saying, well, what does this NOTAM apply to? So, if we see the letter A, it's aerodrome information. If we see the letter E, it's an en route information. If we see the letter W, it's a navigation warning, something like, say, a restriction of airspace. If we see AE, well, it makes sense that it's both aerodrome and en route. And then finally, we could also have K here, being the rarest of them all, which is going to be a checklist. So there's a few more sections still to go over when it comes to the Q line, and once again, these are important to you as a pilot. Section 9 is the lower limit and the upper limit. This tells us the floor, so the bottom, and as well the ceiling of the NOTAM. When it comes to the upper and lower limits, the floor and the ceiling, we can also see that they're expressed in terms of flight levels. They are represented as 3 figures each, separated by a stroke. So for example, 000, well, that would be the surface of the Earth going up to flight level 090. Now, if a NOTAM does not contain any specific values, notice that they will use the number 000, again for the surface, and then 999 is the upper limit, which means out into the infinity of space. Okay, so anyways, that's how that's done. So the next section, 2 more to go over in the Q line. The next section is the geographical coordinates section. And this, of course, would allow you the ability to, looking at this here, to read it and then to actually plot it on your map. Now, the final item on the Q line, or Q item, is the radius of the area of influence. The radius of the influence uses 3 figures that are always rounded up to the next whole nautical mile. And it encompasses the total area of influence measured from the rounded center coordinates. So we'll take these, and then from there, this would tell us that its radius is 11 nautical miles. Now, this becomes important because later on, when you start to call up NOTAMs, this can also help the system flag a NOTAM that is specific to your flight. Okay, so as an example, maybe I think what I'll do for just a moment is I'll maybe go to the actual website to look at how we call up NOTAMs, and then I'll look at a few examples for you of how NOTAMs could end up being flagged for you. Let's grab that tablet here then. And there we go. So in this case here, we have a pilot who's flying from see ya, I'm departing, and then flying to the airport over here known as see me. Hi everybody, so you can see me as well, right? So in this case, this is the route that the pilot has planned to fly. And in this case, they maybe haven't put any filters into the CFPS system. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. So I can clearly see that I've got a NOTAM that was given a set of coordinates, and it was said that the radius for this particular NOTAM was 10 nautical miles. So there's our nice little circle. So of course, as we fly through here, well, we do touch the edge of this particular NOTAM. So guess what? The NOTAM is noted and it's flagged. Now, as I mentioned, another way that this could happen, of course, is through the NOTAM system recognizing that the flight information region coincides with my aerodrome. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the CFPS system next here. So let's do that. Let's go to the CFPS system here. And I just want to show you there. Okay, so we can see on the side that we've got all sorts of check marks. Here's the NOTAM check mark. English and French is listed. But right here we have something that says route radius. So in this case, this one doesn't have any radius listed. So it will only pick up NOTAMs within my flight information region probably, or like in that situation where I just showed you, where if our line crosses through a NOTAM, then it could pop up. So what I'm going to do, and this will probably end up giving us a lot of NOTAMs, is I am going to change this to say 60 nautical miles for my radius of route. All right, let's put up here a NOTAM, and I'm just going to say CY, or actually let's go CYQK maybe. So that should be Kenora, and then let's say from Kenora, I'm going to go to Thunder Bay, which is CYQT, if I remember correctly. There we go. I was right. So now I'm going to hit the search button. Ta-da. And as we can see, now I've got all of these NOTAMs here. So let's just call that up. Now, I'm not going to read each and every one of these NOTAMs. But we can see right here, as I look up here, I can see the continuity numbers. So G, 2,773rd NOTAM in 2022, and it is a new NOTAM. From there, anyways, this is interesting information, but you can look at it quickly. But really what I want you to see is that for this particular route with a 60 nautical mile radius, look at how many NOTAMs there are that are popping up. So you can see here how it says en route, and then back here, you can see that it says near CYQK, so that's the aerodrome versus en route flag actually working in the NOTAM system here. Okay, so finally, I get down to some of the weather, and then look at this, a pile more NOTAMs as well again. Just go back up here. There we go. A bunch more NOTAMs as well again. So you do need to go through these, and yeah, taking the time to read through each one of these can sometimes take you a little bit of time for sure. Okay, now let's quickly look at what I've done here with the route radius of 60 nautical miles. So let's go back over to the draw program here, and I'm just going to scroll down here to what I've just done. So the difference here is, in this case, we now have, again, see ya, and then to see me. But this time, as you can see, I've put the filters in. So the filter I set up was 60 nautical miles. So that's represented by this blue line through here. So maybe I've got a NOTAM number 1, NOTAM number 2, and then I've got NOTAM number 4, and then I've got NOTAM number 3. Well, NOTAM 1 and 2 are clearly within the zone that I've selected. Notice that initially maybe NOTAM number 3 seems to be outside of my zone, but it has a designator that shows and says, well, radius of 20. And it barely goes into that 60 nautical mile corridor that I've designated. So, of course, what's going to happen is that NOTAM is going to get flagged as well. So NOTAMs 1, 2, and 3, those are going to be noted, but NOTAM 4 is going to be skipped. All right, so I think that's a pretty good showing and introduction to the CFPS system, and as well how these NOTAMs are getting caught and distributed for you as a pilot. All right, let's move on to the next item. So the next item is item A, the location indicator. This shows the aerodrome or the flight information region in which the facility, airspace, or condition being repeated is located. Now, for this one, we've already learned about this. If it's a flight information region, well, if there's no available ICAO location indicator, the nationality letter plus XX. We will then be told in item E the name in plain language. Now let's imagine a situation where it's an aerodrome. And in Canada, what we have is we have a unique blend of letters and numbers. The NOTAM system internationally doesn't handle that very well. So what will happen is if we have an aerodrome like CCD3, which is Woodstock, notice that item A goes CXXX. All right, so that's just the way it goes. If an aerodrome has a location indicator with 3 letters and 1 number, then item A will be displayed as CXXX. Then we would look to item E to identify exactly which aerodrome that is. For item B, we're now moving into the times that tell us the start time, and then item C later on, as we'll look at, is the end time. Notice that the start time is given in year, month, day, hours, and minutes in UTC. This is the date which the NOTAM comes into force. Now, if it happened to be a NOTAM R or a NOTAM C, the date time group is the actual date and time of the NOTAM origination. Always remember that the start of a day is 0000. So this particular NOTAM here, as I read through this, I can see that it's 2019, and then here it's the month, so that's going to be May 6th at 1300 UTC. Next up, we have the ending time. Now, sometimes we may have a NOTAM that is of a more permanent nature. If that's the case, we will use the abbreviation PERM. That's not because you're going to get your hairstylist to like curl your hair or maybe straighten your hair and make it permanently that way. No, PERM is permanent. A PERM can be semi-permanent when it can. The end of the day will be indicated by 2359. Okay, so the start of a day is 000, as we've just learned. The end of the day is 2359. Now, there may be cases where they don't know exactly how long a NOTAM will last. I mean, painting the runway. The people run out there, they grab their paint brushes, and they're like, yeah, they should be done by the end of the day. The end of the day comes and, oh, we're not done, and it's going to take longer to dry than we thought. So, maybe, you know what, just in case if that's going to happen, we should put EST, which is estimated. Now, it's important that you remember this, because if you see EST, it's not Eastern Standard Time. It's estimated time that the NOTAM will be applicable to. If EST is at the end of a NOTAM, then we need to have either a replacing NOTAM, so a NOTAM R, or a canceling NOTAM issued at the estimated time. Very, very important that you remember that. Now, when it comes to a canceling NOTAM, there will not be a time. All right, so again, watch out because this is a very common exam question right here. If we see EST, then a canceling or a replacing NOTAM must be issued. If we have a canceling NOTAM, there doesn't need to be a time. A canceling NOTAM is effective at that very moment that that NOTAM is put out. Now, for item 15, item D, line D, maybe you might say. If the event occurs at specific times UTC during the in-force period indicated in items B and C, such information will be inserted under item D. Daily is used to indicate a daily occurrence. Okay, so in this case here with this NOTAM, remember it says 19, so then we've got February 1st at 1500. So 19, February 1st to 2100. So between 1500 and 2100. So this is telling us that daily, between these times, this NOTAM will be effective. Now, it's kind of interesting because, I mean, this is only for one day anyways. That said, imagine that this said from 1902 to maybe, say, the 20th of February. Okay, that would make a lot more sense because then, well, that's a period of almost 20 days, right? So this would be telling me that every day this would be occurring during these times. Now, next up, we have item E. This is going to give us the information regarding the NOTAM in plain English. Well, maybe not always plain English, but in English text. It uses decoded NOTAM codes, ICAO abbreviations, various identifiers, designators, call signs, frequencies, and figures in supposedly plain language, although it's just said that there's all sorts of abbreviations in this as well sometimes. Haha, that's not completely plain language, but we can have plain language in here as well. So for item E here, it says, flight inspection operations will take place within the 10 nautical mile radius centered on these geographical coordinates near the Kattenack-Donaldson Aerodrome. Okay, all right, that's pretty simple, easy to understand. And the example here, okay, well, let's read through this quickly. We can see the year, the month, the day, the time it starts, and the day it ends. So in this particular case, this one makes quite a bit more sense because it says from the 6th of May, and this one here says to the 10th of May. All right, let me just check that to make sure that that's right. It can be a little bit hard to read. Yes, okay. So here it says daily, between these times, this advisory area is going to be active. All right, okay, so let's continue on then to the lower limit number. Item F here in this NOTAM is showing us that the lower limit is the surface. Over here, in this particular NOTAM, I can see that the lower limit is 3,500 feet above mean sea level. Okay. The abbreviations ground or surface shall be used to designate, of course, the ground and surface respectively. The next item, item G, is now going to be the upper limit. So we just talked about the floor of the NOTAM. Now we're going to talk about the ceiling or the top of the NOTAM. So item G in this particular NOTAM says that it goes from the surface, item G, the top is 2,500 feet above mean sea level. This particular NOTAM here goes from 3,500 feet up to 10,000 feet above mean sea level. Now, should you look in this section and you see the abbreviation UNL, that is unlimited, as opposed to unleaded. Anyways, it's sometimes fun to make up random acronyms. Unlimited, people. Now, when it comes to many things in flying, practice makes perfect. Practice again and again and again and again. Read NOTAMs and keep reading NOTAMs, and you will get better and better and better at them. So let's do one of these, a few of these actually together. Let's start out with this NOTAM here. So there's my series number. So it's series K, series letter I should say, series K, the 19th NOTAM of 2019. I can see right here that this is a brand spanking new NOTAM. From there, I then have the Q line. So I have the flight information region, the decoding bit that I don't need to worry about for the exam. And then here I have IV, so this tells me that it's both an IFR and a VFR NOTAM, right? Next up, I've got the BO designator. So this tells me that this NOTAM needs to be part of a pre-flight briefing and that it also needs to be known as an operations NOTAM for flight operations. A, of course, is an aerodrome NOTAM. I've got the floor at 3,500 feet, flight level 35. and then I've got the ceiling, which is 10,000 feet. Here are my geographical coordinates. And for this particular item, it looks like it's located within 10 nautical miles of the aerodrome, or has a radius of 10 nautical miles. Aha, so I see the CXXX. So that means that this is applicable to a specific aerodrome. Which specific aerodrome? Well, I got to go down here, and there we go. There's that CTP9 Katnick-Donaldson Airport. So the starting time of this particular NOTAM happens to be 2019, February 4th at 1500 Zulu. The finishing time is 2019, February 8th at 2100. So this particular NOTAM lasts for, it looks like, 4 days and 6 hours. Okay, another common exam question where they'll get you to look at these, read them, and say how long they're in effect for. So daily from 1500 and 2100 to, as well, 1700 and 2000, we have the following happening. Flight inspection operations will take place within 10 nautical miles radius centered on these coordinates. Again, a reminder of the floor, 3,500 feet, and the ceiling, 10,000 feet. So if I'm below this, the NOTAM does not apply to me. If I'm above this, the NOTAM does not apply to me. Here's another one that we can go through. So in this particular case, I've got Series D, and it looks like this is the 999th NOTAM of 2014. It is a new NOTAM. Now, from there, as the Q item gets read out, LSGL, you know what, I think that's in Switzerland somewhere. I'm not sure. You can Google that and you can figure that out on your own, but I think that's in Switzerland somewhere. Okay, the fancy 5-letter thinger that I don't need to worry about for my exam, but this part I do, IFR, VFR. In this case, this is an OTAM that needs immediate attention. It should be the part of a pre-flight briefing, and it's for flight operations for a specific aerodrome. It's going to go from the surface all the way up to 999. What does 999 mean, people? Yes, out into the infinity of space. The geographical coordinates, and then this is 5 miles from these geographical coordinates. Again, LSGL, so that's the aerodrome. And as I look down at item E, it definitely says aerodrome as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit maybe. Item B, 2014, April 13th at 11:57 Zulu to 2014, April 13th at 14:08 Zulu. It is saying that the aerodrome is closed except for home-based aircraft flying, search and rescue flights, hospital helicopters flying as well. All right, so this aerodrome is closed for a very short period of time. It doesn't really say why, but it just says that it is, and that there are a few exceptions. All right, so I've done this with you already. How do we get NOTAMs? Well, we go to CFPS, the Collaborative Flight Planning Services. As you've seen me do, you can search for those NOTAMs by entering an aerodrome ID. You could also enter nav aids or flight information regions or even geographical coordinates if you wanted. You can also, as you've seen, give a desired radius of action, which I showed you as well. You can enter a flight route. So I did that with you earlier where we went between Kenora and Thunder Bay. Gave you a flight route with a corridor of 60 nautical miles. So as you can see, there's all sorts of choices that you have. Nice little Nav Canada web banner for the Collaborative Flight Planning Services there. Now, to finish our presentation, let's maybe work through a practical example. And then I'm actually going to go through, well, one example as well of a NOTAM that failed, or the NOTAM system failing. Now, for those of you who are maybe just listening in on an MP3, it might be actually best if you watched the video. That way you can actually see the diagrams that I'm going to show. So, for those of you who are already watching the video, good on you. Let's keep moving along here then. Imagine that during a cross-country in the Ottawa area, you notice that you are going to fly through CYA 534S. Now, I just want to say this before going much further. Quite frequently, here's a trip, well, not a trip, but here's something that happens, yeah, it is a trip up for sure. It frequently happens to many pilots who are using ForeFlight or Flight Plan Go. You might accidentally be looking at an American chart, and when you look at the American chart, there's very little information for you to find here. So, let's look at the American chart here. Now, wherever my route is, maybe it's from kind of like Moorwood and I'm flying across this way to some destination over here to the west. But I know and I see that I'm flying through this area right here. Now, the American chart that are typically the default on ForeFlight or Flight Plan Go simply shows me CYA 534S. So I know that it's sailing, and they do have here the American symbol for a glider in this particular advisory area. Otherwise, I don't have a whole lot more information. So for those of us who are flying in Canada, it's best to make sure that we change in ForeFlight or Flight Plan Go or Garmin Pilot to the Canadian charts. So turn off the American charts. Once I do that, here I'm now given the applicable VTA. And there's a lot more information here for me now. I can see the advisory area right here. I can see this arrow telling me CYA 534S, and it says 2 below, 2,500 feet. Occasionally daytime by NOTAM for CZUL. Oh. So what this is telling me on this chart here is I better make sure that I check my NOTAMs to see if it is actually active or being utilized. Okay, so I could, of course, as well, take a brief look at the Designated Airspace Handbook. So in this case, I do actually open up the Designated Airspace Handbook, and I see CYA 534S, KARS, Ontario, and it gives the coordinates here, and then it tells me the altitudes typically. Here, time of designation, occasionally set up by NOTAM. All right, it's activated on request and when approved by Ottawa Terminal. The rules for Class G airspace apply when the area is active. When not active, the rules for the applicable surrounding airspace apply. All right. So maybe I should now go to the NOTAMs and check it out and see if this area is actually active. So you can see here we went to CFPS. Hopefully it pulls it up. Our route should intersect with the radius of the NOTAM for it to be pulled up. Of course, if I wanted, as we saw, I could change my search radius, which might help pull it up. So, in this case here, we actually do see. Okay, so Series H, NOTAM number 121 of 2019, NOTAM new. It's in the Montreal flight region. All this stuff that I don't need to know for the exam. Happens to be IFR and VFR. And then we've got the M designator. And from here, we've got now the floor and the ceiling and the designator along with the radius. So from May 6th, 1300 to May 10th at 2000 UTC, daily from 1300 to 1600 and 1700 to 2000, advisory area CYA 534S is active. Surface to below 2,500 feet above mean sea level, and then surface again to 2,500 feet above mean sea level is listed also. All right, so there we go. That's a good practical example. Now, as we head towards wrapping up this presentation, the question is, why do we have NOTAMs? Well, as you've seen, it's to identify potential hazards or changes to anything that might affect us when we go flying. So here's an example of where the NOTAM system failed. Here's what happens when you don't properly NOTAM an airfield that's under construction. In late 2004, one C-23 Sherpa flew into a US-operated airfield in Iraq during the day. This pilot happened to see that there was construction at this particular airport and lots of equipment on the runway. There wasn't any NOTAM. However, being the daytime, this particular pilot saw the equipment, all the construction workers and stuff, and decided, well, hey, I'm a military aircraft and there's lots of room. I'm just going to fly over everybody on the runway and land past them. A trench was being dug, and it wasn't marked. It's a long runway, so as mentioned, this C-23 just simply landed. They filed a safety hazard report, and it was forwarded to the Air Force wing based, I guess, in Iraq. But it seems like the construction continued and nobody NOTAM'd this. So guess what happens later that day? Well, I shouldn't say day, later that night. A C-130 now comes in on the night of the 29th. And because it's dark, it didn't see the construction at all. It wound up going through that trench. And it didn't turn out very well. The C-130 was totaled. There were several injuries to the crew and a few passengers that were on board, but fortunately no one was killed. Quite the set of failures to not have this airport NOTAM'd. It resulted in the destruction of a C-130. So NOTAMs are important that they are sent out. All right, so here we have, I guess, the next morning. You can see the C-130 way out here, fire trucks in place, and look at the hole here, and everybody looking at the hole and saying, oh, that's a big hole, isn't it? Yeah, that's a really big hole. No wonder why the C-130 got damaged. Now, when you look here, we'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, most of the wing is sheared off. We've got one engine here. This should be a 4-engine aircraft, so one engine is over there on the wing. Look at the belly of the airplane here. Like, the belly just kind of got almost ripped off. A couple of engines, well, these are the back sections of the engines. There's one there. That one's missing a propeller and everything like that. I definitely would think that this airplane is a write-off for sure. Looking from behind, well, there's the missing wing, tire here, all sorts of assorted debris in through here. That airplane's definitely a write-off. And then look at that. You can see the front part of this poor C-130 just ripped off. What is that? That's a good maybe a couple of feet for sure. That's pretty deep. Look at the wheel marks here as well. Anyways, yeah. Should have been NOTAM'd. Now, for you as a pilot, as we finish, always check your NOTAMs before you go flying. Other interesting events can happen because we fail to read and check the NOTAMs. I mean, I told you that story about the student who had lights that didn't work, runway lights that are inoperable. Other stories that I've heard of include flying to airports with closed runways, flying to airports without any fuel there to buy. Maybe their fuel pumps are broken, or maybe they didn't get the delivery truck that came in on time and it's supposed to show up in a day or two. That's a big one, and I've had that happen to some students. Navigation aids that are not working. The ILS, NDBs and VORs are slowly disappearing, but they don't work when you expect them to, and they've been NOTAM'd. Airspace can change. and you might end up flying through, say, a restricted zone or an advisory zone and not even know because that airspace suddenly popped up. These, of course, are only a few examples. Be sure that you check those NOTAMs prior to every flight and that you read through them carefully. Spend time learning how to read these so that when they do pop up, you know how to adjust your flight based on the information you're given. So, check your NOTAMs. Check your NOTAMs, check your NOTAMs. Because if you don't check your NOTAMs, something might happen that you don't expect. And if you don't expect it, then something's probably gonna hurt.